as we get started, this is the first time I preached this year. Obviously, it's only the 8th, but we had kind of talked last year towards the end about how we were gonna try and have me preach and kind of go along with the reading that we're doing. So for those of you that have kind of been following and reading along, we kind of just wanted to follow that. And as I was looking at kind of how to approach it, it was kind of difficult because there's just so many things. And if you look in your bulletin, where there should be scripture, there's just kind of a list of important things about the book of Genesis. And that was kind of important because, one, when you have to kind of follow along for a whole book, you know, there's too much to go over that you can just kind of throw into a few verses. So I was trying to think of what we could do and how we could focus on things so that we can see a connection between every book or most books, or just kind of go along. You know, if we just went with the story of creation, well, then on day 8 we're kind of done. If we follow, let's say, Moses, if we follow Moses, then when Moses passes away, it kind of passes to one person in Joshua, and so it's kind of hard to do everything. And so as I was thinking about where we can kind of focus and what we should, you know, if there's lots of stories to kind of look at, where we should look at, I kind of thought about how, and most people kind of realize it in Exodus when they talk about the people wanting to leave Egypt. That's God's chosen people. And so if we go to the next slide here, I kind of thought that we could do this and we could kind of look through everything through the eyes of God's chosen people. Okay? So God's chosen people are the people that, you know, again, when we talk about the book of Exodus, they're the people who, you know, prayed to God to say, hey, we're slaves, help us get out of here. But the crazy part is how did they get there? And so the book of Genesis, let's say starting in about, it kind of mentions Abram in the chapter 11, and then more starting in chapter 12. But if you kind of look right now, we're on day 8. Obviously, it's the 8th. I shouldn't have struggled there. But it's day 8, so we're on day 8. And so I just kind of wanted to go over what's going to happen, a little bit of what we've already read, and a little bit of what we're going to read. And then we'll finish up the month next week talking about Job. Okay? So as we kind of go through everything, we're just going to kind of be looking at it through the eyes of God's chosen people. Okay? And so there's a whole lot of verses to go over, and we'll go to the next slide here. And again, we talked about in chapter 12, Abram is first mentioned, I believe, in chapter 11. But in chapter 12 here, it says the call of Abram. Okay? And so if we read here, it says, the Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. So again, that's something that maybe we don't think about or give enough credit to, but here's the Lord, and he goes to him and he says, every single family on earth is going to be blessed through you. So if we continue to go on, that's the first time this is the first time that the covenant has been kind of spoken about. And so now in Genesis chapter 15, it says, as the sun was going down, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness came down over him. Then the Lord said to Abram, you can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. But I will punish the nation that enslaves them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth. As for you, you will die in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. After 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land, for the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction. So this is what we have here in Genesis chapter 15. And there's a couple things that we just kind of want to focus on or pay attention to. And it says here, in the previous verses that we looked at, it said that everybody in the whole entire earth would be blessed. But now here, if we look, it says, you can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land. So there's going to be some moving around. And, you know, you would think that if the whole entire earth was going to be blessed, that we would just start this blessing right away as soon as possible. But instead it says that you're going to be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. So now they know that they're going to have to go somewhere else and that they're going to be slaves for 400 years. And then he will punish the nation that enslaves them, but in the end they will come away with great wealth. And so I don't know what Abram was thinking right now, but that's a whole lot to process. It's a whole lot to process that the whole world is going to be blessed by you, but then you have to be slaves. But then when you're done being slaves, you're going to have a whole bunch of wealth. So then he tells Abram specifically, you're going to die in peace, but you're going to be buried at a ripe old age. And then finally, you're going to be coming back here. Okay? So that's kind of what he told him as he's in this deep sleep. And if we move on, now we've moved to chapter 17 here. And we have a lot to go through. If you haven't looked, Genesis is 50 chapters long. So again, creation takes up a couple. We have Noah and some of the other stories we mentioned in your bulletin. But as far as how these people got from point A to point B, that's kind of chapters 12 through 50. So it's a lot. And here in chapter 17 it says, at this, Abram fell face down on the ground. Then God said to him, this is my covenant with you. I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. What's more, I am changing your name. It will no longer be Abram. Instead, you will be called Abraham, for you will be the father of many nations. I will make you extremely fruitful. Your descendants will become many nations, and kings will be among them. I will confirm my covenant with you and your descendants after you, from generation to generation. This is the everlasting covenant. I will always be your God and the God of your descendants after you. And I will give you the entire land of Canaan, where you now live as a foreigner. To you, your descendants, it will be their possession forever, and I will be their God. So again, if you're Abram and you're listening to this, there's a whole lot of positive things to listen to here. And it says here that I'm going to confirm this covenant with your descendants after you, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. And it also says, I will be your God and the God of your descendants after you. And I think that's so powerful that here this person is, and again, we're only in Genesis chapter 17, and he's letting it known that all the descendants afterwards, he's going to be their God. And so again, when we talk about looking through things through the eyes of God's chosen people, that's all these people that he's making this covenant with. He's saying that he's going to be their God. And I think that that's just something that sometimes we gloss over and we don't pay attention to. But he's making that promise here back in chapter 17 of the whole entire Bible. So if we kind of move on here, we're going to go from chapter 17 here to chapter 21. And it says that he's going to make this covenant with all of his descendants. And so here's the birth of Isaac. And it says, the Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. And that right there was one of those things where I wish we had 5 or 6 hours to kind of go over everything. We kind of skipped a big story here where Sarah wanted a baby and she wasn't having a baby, and she laughed at God. And so here it is where even though she laughed at God and didn't think it was possible for her to have a child, she's going to have a child. And it says here that Sarah, the Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. She became pregnant and she gave birth to a son Abraham in his old age. This happened at just the time God had said it would. So she laughed at God and said, God said, hey, you're going to have a child in a year from now. And she laughed at him. And here it is a year later, and it's exactly the way God said it would. And it said, and Abraham named their son Isaac. 8 days after Isaac was born, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded. And it seems like when we're reading this, it's so easy to kind of say, oh my gosh, she laughed at God. How could she do that? But this line right here, it kind of explains it. It says, Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Okay, so that's why she kind of laughed and didn't take it 100% seriously. So now he has told Abraham and he has told Isaac about this covenant that he made. So now we have Isaac, and it says here in chapter 25, the births of Esau and Jacob. And it says, Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children. The Lord answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. But the two children struggled with each other in her womb. So this is what's amazing to me is here she's having this pregnancy and things she can tell are a little bit rough. And so what does she choose to do? And it says here in verse 22, it says, "But the children struggled with each other in her womb, so she went to ask the Lord about it." She was smart enough to know that there was something going on in there and that only the Lord could answer it. And so she says, "Why is this happening to me?" she asked. And the Lord told her, "The sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son." And when the time came to give birth, Rebekah discovered that she did indeed have twins. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat, so they named him Esau. Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. So I don't know how many of you want to start over at 60, but that's not kind of the direction I want to go with. Okay, so now we kind of talked about it, and we had Abram, and then we had Isaac, and now we have Jacob. And so now we want to hear Jacob hear from the Lord and talk about the covenant. And so we're in chapter 28. It says Jacob's dream at Bethel. So in verse 10 it says, "Meanwhile, Jacob left Beersheba and traveled toward Haran. At sundown he arrived at a good place to set up camp and stopped there for the night. Jacob found a stone to rest his head against and lay down to sleep. As he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from the earth up to heaven. And he saw the angels of God going up and down the stairway. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, 'I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you are lying on belongs to you. I am giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. And all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. Once more, I am with you, and I will protect you wherever you go. One day I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I have promised you.'" So again, if we kind of go through this, here this is the third child, and he's going through everything, and he says, "Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you." So again, he's making that promise that everybody on earth is going to be blessed through them. And I think that's so powerful. And then the other thing that he kind of adds here is it says, "And I will protect you wherever you go." Too often as we kind of go through things and we think, oh, maybe there's a promise out there for us, but we don't trust God that he's going to protect us. And so God just kind of came out and said, "I'm going to protect you wherever you go. Just understand that one day I'm going to bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I have promised you." So what a powerful, powerful set of verses there. So now here we talk about it. It says in verse 28 of chapter 32, it says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won." So again, this is another thing that if we had tons of time we could kind of go over, but Jacob found himself alone and he wrestled with God. And so this is what they're talking about, is that after he wrestled God, he said, "From now on you will be called Israel." Okay? So again, when we talk about the Israelites, this is where this comes from. So now here we are, and again, we have to fast forward quite a bit here. And so what happens is Jacob is now settled in the land of Canaan. And so he has these 12 sons. And what happens is he has a son that he had with, he had a couple wives, and of course, that's a story that we had to skip over for the sake of time. But again, that's why it's so important for you to read this stuff and go through the daily reading. Because what we want to do here on Sunday mornings is just kind of give you a little bit of a synopsis and kind of make sure that you're following along, and that you kind of, sometimes again, when it says this is what happened in chapter 32, and it kind of doesn't follow up until chapter 37, sometimes we can get lost and confused, or again, if you do that, we were talking about this in Bible study this morning. Sometimes if you read something the day before, by the time you get to it the next day, you've kind of forgot what you read, or you kind of got lost. And so that's kind of what we want to do here. And so Jacob had 12 sons, and he loved Joseph the most because he loved Joseph's mother so much. Okay, so Joseph's mother at first could not have a child, and then all of a sudden she had Joseph, and so Jacob just loved Joseph so much. And so it says here, it says, so Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. This is the account of Jacob and his family. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children, because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. Okay, so again, you have, and I think when it says this, they're talking about the 10 older brothers more than anything. So the 10 older brothers really didn't like Joseph that much. And so they already didn't like him, and his father gives him this robe. And then we run into this situation where Joseph has a couple dreams. Okay? And so not only did he have these 2 dreams, but he decided to tell his brothers about the dreams. And so that's where some of the issues came up. And so what we kind of skipped over a little bit there is that he had these dreams, and they were bundles of grain. Okay, so there was 12 bundles of grain representing the 12 brothers. And Joseph says, suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. So he has this dream that kind of says that at some point that these brothers of his, even though he's the 11th brother out of 12, that these other brothers are going to bow to him. And then it says soon after that he had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. He said, listen, I have had another dream. He said, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me. So it says there that there's the sun and the moon, and in this situation that represents his mom and dad, and then the 11 stars represent his brother. And so he's very, the brothers are very upset by this, and the father's a little bit upset too, but the father he says something interesting here, and it says, but while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant. So again, his father is smart enough to know that sometimes God's speaking to you, and so he kind of wondered what they meant. And so here we'll kind of go to, let's say verse 4, we'll just start off. And it says, but his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. So now here in verse 12 it says, soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. When they had been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready and I will send you to them. I'm ready to go, Joseph replied. Go and see how your brothers in the flocks are getting along. Jacob said, then come back and bring me a report. So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. Okay, so now we have a situation where Joseph is going to go, and he's going to go to these 10 brothers that are out in the fields. And these brothers have been out in the fields all day, and just probably talking to themselves a lot about how much they hated Joseph. So if we go to the next verse, the next page here. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. So they've been out here with the flocks all day, and all of a sudden, they're talking to each other, and they see Joseph coming, and they decide that, hey, the best thing we should do here is to kill him, and then that'll put him in his place. They were mad about the robe. They were mad about the dreams. And it says in verse 25 here, it says, then just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming towards them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he was our brother, our own flesh and blood. And the brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern. So they put him in a cistern so he couldn't get out while they decided what they were going to do with him. And it says they pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him to Egypt. So that's where we're at here. They decided not to kill him, and they sold him instead. So now we're in Egypt, and go ahead. And so now what happened is he's sold to Egypt. And it says, when Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And it says here, the Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. And as I kind of read that, I'm thinking to myself, this is exactly what he deserves, right? He was dealt a bad hand, and now God is rewarding him for staying loyal to God throughout all these hardships. And so then it says, Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. All his household affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing except for what kind of food to eat. So this is how God has blessed has blessed Joseph, and we're thinking to ourselves, man, this is a wonderful story, happily ever after the end. But instead, there's this line here, and it says, Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man, and Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. Come and sleep with me, she demanded. And so what happens is, here is the wife of Potiphar trying to get Joseph to sleep with her, and it doesn't work, and it doesn't work, and it doesn't work, until finally she finds herself alone in the house with Joseph, and she tries once again, and what happens is he gets away from her, but he leaves his cloak behind. And so she's so upset that Joseph turned her down that she goes and tells everybody that Joseph tried to attack her, but luckily she screamed, and so when she screamed, he got scared and ran away, but he left his cloak. So that's what she told Potiphar when he got home that day. And so it says, Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. So he took Joseph and threw him in the prison where the king's prisoners were held. And there he remained. But the Lord was with Joseph in prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. Okay, so now here we are. Joseph again is put in a bad situation. But again, if we kind of look at this, and I think this is an important lesson that again, we kind of hurry up and go over sometimes, is that as people keep putting Joseph in horrible situations, look at everything that he's learning to do. He learned how to run Potiphar's household. Now he's in prison, and he's learning how to do all these things here. And he's just learning, and God is blessing him this whole entire time. And so now what happens after this is that Pharaoh throws two people in prison with him. Okay? So Pharaoh throws his chief baker and his chief cupbearer. Thank you. His chief cupbearer in prison with him. And while they're there, they have dreams. And they can't figure out what they mean. And so because they don't know what they mean, they're talking about them. And all of a sudden Joseph says, my God can translate these dreams for you. And so what happens is he tells them their dreams, and Joseph says, okay, I know exactly what they mean. And it says in 3 days, when it's Pharaoh's birthday, the cupbearer is going to be restored and get his old job back, but the chief baker is going to be killed. And of course, this is what happens. And Joseph makes one request. He says to the chief cupbearer, he says, remember me when you go work for Pharaoh again. But he doesn't. Okay? So as we go to this next slide, it says, and this is the crazy part to me, 2 full years later. It wants us to know that this is 2 full years later. And so again, when we look at it, we're saying this is 2 full years later that he had to do those things. But again, I just want to point out, this is more time that he got to learn how to do something. He was learning a trade. He was learning how to run things. And so it says here, 2 full years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. In his dream, he saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. Then he saw 7 more cows come up behind them from the Nile, but these were scrawny and thin. These cows stood beside the fat cows on the riverbank. Then the scrawny, thin cows ate the 7 healthy, fat cows. At this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up, but he fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time he saw 7 heads of grain, plump and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but they were shriveled and withered by the east wind. And these thin heads swallowed up the 7 plump, well-formed heads. Then Pharaoh woke up again and realized that it was a dream. The next morning, Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dream, so he called for all the magicians and the wise men of Egypt. When Pharaoh told them his dreams, not one of them could tell him what they meant. Okay, so here we have Pharaoh, and he's kind of going through, and he has these dreams, and he's going to all of his people, and none of them can figure it out. So I'm guessing that here Pharaoh's very stressed out, and everybody can tell that he's stressed out. And of course, one of the people that can see that he's stressed out is, of course, this chief cupbearer. And so, all of a sudden, the chief cupbearer says, "Oh, I kind of forgot to tell you this, but I know somebody who can interpret dreams." And so, now all of a sudden, because it benefits him, the chief cupbearer remembers that Joseph can interpret the dreams, and he tells Pharaoh about it. And then Joseph comes up and interprets the dream and tells him that you're going to have 7 years of prosperity. 7 years where everything is going to go perfectly, and we're going to have a lot of crop, and everything is just going to be wonderful. But the next 7 years after that are going to be so horrible that everybody's going to forget about this 7 years of prosperity. That's how bad it's going to be. And so what you need to do, and this is Joseph saying this, he said, what you need to do is find someone to run the land for the 7 years while everything is in prosperity, so that you can save grain and get everything under control. And that while everything is under control and we're saving food and getting everything in place, that when the 7 years of famine come, we're going to be okay. So just find somebody to do that. And so now here in verse 37 it says, Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, "Can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or as wise as you. You will be in charge of my court, and all the people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours." So again, all those years where Joseph was put in horrible situations, he was learning how to run things. And God made sure that he knew this. And so now all of a sudden he's put in charge. And it says here in verse 41, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck. Then he had Joseph ride in the chariot reserved for his second in command, and wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, "Kneel down." So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all Egypt. And Pharaoh said to him, "I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval." So by this point, go ahead and go to the next verse here. It says, so now we're in chapter 42, and we're getting towards the end, and we kind of forgot about the brothers who sold them. We're so focused on how blessed that Joseph is that we forgot about the brothers. And so it says here, when Jacob heard that grain was available in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why are you standing around looking at one another? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy enough grain to keep us alive. Otherwise we'll die." So Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. Since Joseph was governor of all of Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was to him his brothers came. When they arrived, they bowed before him and their faces to the ground. Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where are you from?" he demanded. And so from here it gets a little bit crazy, and he accuses his brothers of being spies, and he starts asking them about their family. And he's trying to figure out, is my father alive, and is my younger brother alive? And he figures this out, and again, he keeps messing with them, and he kind of scares them, but sends them back to Canaan. But again, it's 7 years of famine, so they have to come back. And so finally, when they come back, he decides to reveal it, that he's their brother. And so it says, Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him. And word of it quickly he carried to Pharaoh's palace. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt." So I'm thinking at this point they realized that they had bowed down to him and those dreams were true. And they realized that they're probably in trouble because they're the ones that sold them. And so anyway, after much discussion, Pharaoh finds out that they're his brothers and that he has his father back in Canaan. And he says, "Why don't you bring your father and your family and move them up here to Egypt with you?" Okay? So now it says Jacob's journey to Egypt. So they go back and they tell their brother that Joseph is alive. And it says, so Jacob set out for Egypt with all of his possessions. And when he came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to God, to the God of his father Isaac. During the night, God spoke to him in a vision. "Jacob, Jacob," he called. "Here I am," Jacob replied. "I am God, the God of your father," the voice said. "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make your family into a great nation." So right there when he says, "I will make your family into a great nation," this is God's chosen people that we're talking about. Okay? And so he says, "I will make your family into a great nation. I will go with you down to Egypt, and I will bring you back again. You will die in Egypt, but Joseph will be with you to close your eyes." So Jacob left Beersheba, and his sons took him to Egypt. They carried him and their little ones and their wives to the wagons. Pharaoh had provided for them. They also took all of their livestock and all their personal belongings they had acquired in the land of Canaan. So Jacob and his entire family went to Egypt. Sons and grandsons, daughters and grandsons, Sons and grandsons, daughters and granddaughters, all his descendants. So now all of his descendants are in Egypt. And so now we're in a situation where it said that Jacob was going to go there and he was going to die with Joseph, where Joseph was. So verse 14 says, "After burying Jacob, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had accompanied him to his father's burial. But now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became fearful. 'Now Joseph will show his anger and pay us back for all the wrong we did to him,' they said. So they sent this message to Joseph. 'Before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, please forgive your brothers for the great wrong they did to you, for their sin in treating you so cruelly. So we, the servants of the God of your father, beg you to forgive our sin.' When Joseph received the message, he broke down and wept. Then his brothers came and threw themselves down before Joseph. 'Look, we are your slaves,' they said." And this is one of my favorite verses in the whole entire Bible, and something that I think that we can all learn from. It says, "But Joseph replied, 'Do not be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you?' And then here's the verse I love so much. It says, 'You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people.'" So again, there's going to be times that bad things happen to us. There's going to be times that things are unfair. But all those times that things were unfair, that was God preparing Joseph for what he wanted him to do. And so it kind of ends here with, "No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children." So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. No, here's the death of Joseph. So Joseph and his brothers and their families continued to live in Egypt. Joseph lived to the age of 110. He lived to see 3 generations of descendants of his son Ephraim. And he lived to see the birth of the children of Manasseh's son Machir, whom he claimed as his own. "Soon I will die," Joseph told his brothers, "but God will surely come to help you and lead you out of this land of Egypt. He will bring you back to the land he solemnly promised to give Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath, and he said, "When God comes to help you and lead you back, you must take my bones with you." So Joseph died at the age of 110. The Egyptians embalmed him, and his body was placed in a coffin in Egypt. So I think what's so amazing here is that when they're talking and they're saying that it says, "Soon I will die, but God will surely come to help you and lead you out of the land of Egypt." But they don't know that there's any problems yet. But he's telling them, like, hey, you're going to have problems, and when you do, you need to look to God, and that he's going to help you. And so that is how we got God's chosen people to Egypt. And that's kind of where we're going to go from here on out. And this is going to take us all the way until Jesus is here. Okay? So again, just please understand that these first couple books of the Bible are pretty big, and we're going to get through them. But it's a lot to know that we're going to pay attention to God's chosen people and what happens from there.